Okay, I got it on. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salli ala Rasulil Kareem. We got a very interesting sabak today, which we introduced yesterday, and the various scenarios that arise from this year. Um, Remember, we discussed this before. We said that in a faraz namaz, you only have to recite in the first two rakats, but in a nafil namaz, you have to recite in all four rakats, right? You have to recite in all four rakats. And if you don't recite in any one rakat, you'll be leaving out a necessary thing. It won't be done, etc. Right? The namaz will become fast. So there's an interesting thing here now. If a person was reading a four rakat namaz and he didn't recite in all four rakats, he recited in some rakats, he never recited in some rakats. Now altogether here, if you look at it, there are 16 surahs that can come out. Like I told you, recite the first rakat, recite the second rakat, third rakat, fourth rakat. And I mentioned the different scenarios yesterday. I mentioned all the different scenarios. Although Sahib Hidayah here in his kitab, he only mentions 8 scenarios. He mentions 8 scenarios. But if you understand these 8 scenarios, it will be good enough for you to understand the whole lesson. It will be good for you to understand the whole lesson. It will be good enough for you to understand our lesson. I did mention the usul yesterday, but I'll just mention the usul again because you need to have it. You have to have istihzar of the usul. You must have the usul in front of you. And sometimes I told you many times, I told you sometimes you in your mind you were thinking, but this masala is not so relevant. It's not so relevant. Like why are we doing this masala in so much detail? But I promise you, when you understand this thing properly, it will help you understand the usul and maybe not that exact same masla, but you will be able to use the same usul to understand other masail. And I showed you, I proved you many times, I showed you many times already. Sometimes the masla itself doesn't seem so relevant, but the usul behind the masla, you learn so much from it. Like in this example here now, and this one here, which we're going to do, I told you there's 16 scenarios with regards to whether a person made kirat in one rakat or two rakats. Whenever we discuss this in detail, he read in the first rakat, he never read in the last 3 rakats. He read in the first two rakats, he never read in the second 2 rakats. He read in the first rakat, he read in the last rakat. He read in the second rakat, he read in the third rakat. So sometimes the masla might not seem so relevant. Sometimes the masla might not seem relevant, but those usul, they show you how the fuqaha, how they taught what their thought processes were, how they unraveled the Masail. So inshallah today we will dive into the whole inshallah into the Masail. But I just want to recap again quickly the usul because that will help you. See, first was the usul of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Briefly, Imam Abu Hanifa says if you at least what is for the rakat to be valid? We're not discussing the validity of the rakat. That we know. We know in all four rakats you must have the surah and kirat. That's his place. If you leave out the surah and the kirat, that rakat is not valid. So we're not discussing the validity of the rakat. We're discussing the validity of the tahrima. So I'll tell you a simple example. You read uh, 2 rakats namaz, right? In the first rakat, you make kirat, surah and kirat. The second rakat, you never make surah and kirat. So obviously, the second kirat is not valid because it's necessary to make a surah and kirat. As far as you read no Quran in that thing, so that rakat is not valid, right? So that we're not discussing the validity of the actual rakat. We are discussing the validity of the takbir tahrima. I hope you understand it. If you never understand it, don't worry. As we go through the sabak, we'll understand it. So let's look at Imam Hanifa's principle. This is what you call tajheezun lil adhan, something to sharpen your mind. Imam Hanifa says, again, I repeat, we're not speaking about the validity of the kirat. We're speaking about the validity of the tahrima. Remember, tahrima is a prerequisite for your salah. If you don't make takbir tahrima, the rakat is not valid. We done this in the beginning of Hidayah, remember? We said there was ikhtilaf. Is it from the shurut of salah? Is it from the arkan of salah? Remember? If we say from the shurut of salah, it means it's part of the salah. If we say the rukn of salah is part of the salah. But whichever way you look at it, whether it's a shart of salah or whether it's a rukn of salah, it is necessary for salah. Right? So, if Imam Hanifa says that if you are reading a 4 rakat salah, right, and in the first shufa, in both rakats, the first rakat and the second rakat, you do not recite the surah, then that obviously this is in its place. That rakats are not valid. There's no question about that. Nobody is ikhtilaf about that. But that tahrima becomes invalid, because there was no rakats after the tahrima. You understand what I'm saying? But Imam Hanifa says, in the 2 rakats, even if you recite in 1 rakat, if you recite in 1 rakat, we'll say that 2 rakats are not valid, but we say your tahrima is still valid. Why you say the tahrima is still valid? Because they see, according to some imam mujtahideen, according to some imams, that the qiraat is not necessary in both rakats. Allah says, "Faqra'u ma tayassara." So although we don't agree with that, we say you must make qiraat in both rakats. So but since there's ikhtilaf, that shows you that the tahrima can't be batil. Yes, the rakat will not be valid, but the tahrima will not be batil. The tahrima will still stand. You understand what I'm saying? So let's look at, just to understand this properly, I'm saying, let's look at a hypothetical scenario. A person missed 4 rakats namaz, right? And he read in the first rakat, he made qiraat, then he read for the second rakat, then he made qiraat in the third rakat, and he made the rakat in the fourth rakat. According to Imam Hanifa, well, what's the position of the salah? The position of the salah is as follows. Firstly, the first 2 rakats are not done. Why is not done? Because the second rakat there's no qiraat in it, right? And we told you this several times, you must have qiraat in both rakats, right? So that's, is the second 2 rakats valid? According to Imam Hanifa, yes, the second 2 rakats is valid. Why? Because according to Imam Hanifa, even though the first 2 rakats are not valid, but the tahrima is not batil. Why the tahrima is not batil? Even though the 2 rakats are not valid, but the tahrima is still valid, because according to some ulama, the salah is valid, because although according to him it's not valid, because you only have to make qiraat in 1 rakat. You understand what I'm saying? So if the tahrima is not batil, that means the tahrima we know in the nafil namaz, the first tahrima of the first 2 rakats, it suffices for the second 2 rakats as well. Understood? So just to understand now the benefit of it. So a person, in his first rakat, he made qiraat, second rakat, he never made qiraat, third rakat, in the fourth rakat, he made qiraat. According to Hanifa, first 2 rakats, it was just up, down, kiss the ground, it wasn't valid, because he didn't make qiraat in the second rakat, and 1 rakat is not valid on his own. That's placed. Second, third rakat, fourth rakat, it is valid. Why is it valid? Because the tahrima is still in place. You saw that. Now, that was Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, right? Imam Muhammad said, even if you leave out qiraat in 1 rakat, it's not valid. So now the same scenario, look at the same scenario. A person, he read in the first rakat, a second rakat, he never read. Third rakat, and fourth rakat, he made qiraat. According to Imam Hanifa, according to Imam Muhammad, the second and third rakat is not valid. Why? Because he says, look here, when you never recite in the second rakat, that rakat was not valid. And if that rakat was not valid, that means that tahrima is also batil. If that tahrima was batil because you had a tahrima and you had a break, then your 2 rakats, although your 2 rakats, last 2 rakats was valid, but it didn't have a tahrima, because the tahrima became batil was that. You understand what I'm saying? You saw the difference now. Then other Imam Yusuf said, even if you read out qiraat in both rakats, the tahrima does not become batil. The tahrima does. In other words, according to Imam Yusuf, if you recite it in the first rakat and you never recite in the second rakat, or even if you never recite in the second rakat and the first rakat and the second rakat, you made Allah Akbar, you made takbir, you done your first rakat, you recite nothing, second rakat, you recite nothing, besides the du'as, and then you start on your third rakat. Imam Yusuf says the tahrima is not batil. So the sense that tahrima is not batil, your third rakat and fourth rakat is fine, so it will be valid. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That was Imam Yusuf's opinion. So the reasoning actually will come in the kitab. Now, if you keep that in the back of your mind, inshallah, keep that in the back of your mind. Now let's look at the masla. I told you there's actually 16 scenarios, but here Islamic Hidayah only mentioned 8 scenarios. But if you look at these 8 scenarios, the 16 was not in them. It's just a change of the order, you understood? See, وهذه المسألة على ثمانية أوجه. This masla comes upon 8 uh, different styles or ways or forms. Right? Forms. I told you, you think, why must we do this in detail? Shows you how, the application of the usul. You learn to apply the usul. Right? والأصل فيها. read it. والأصل فيها
وإن سن أربعا ولم يقرأ فيهن شيئا عاد ركعتين وعاد عند أبي حنيفة ومحمد وعند أبي يوسف يأخذ أربعا.
Yes, interesting. See, first one. So the principle in it, أن عند محمد ترك القراءة في الأوليين. What you gonna في الأوليين وفي إحداهما يوجب بطلان التحريمة لأنها تؤكد للأفعال. This is the same principle I explained to you earlier. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, if you leave out قراءة ترك القراءة في الأوليين, you got أوليين in the first 2 rakats, وفي إحداهما, or in any one of them too, right? يوجب بطلان it will make necessary the بطلان of the تحريمة لأنها تؤكد للأفعال, because it has been established for أفعال. So this is what they're saying here. See, they're saying yeah. The first scenario is you left out Quran in both the first 2 rakats, or even in one of them. So this is Tarkul Qirati fil Ula, both rakats of the first Shufa. That was number 1 and number 2. You left out Qirat in 1 and 2. Or وفي إحداهما, or you left out Qirat in 1 or 2. So there's 2 scenarios here. How many scenarios are here? 2 scenarios. You left out Qirat in the first rakat and the second rakat, or either in the first one or the second one. So actually, there's 3 scenarios here. What are they? One scenario, you left out rakat in both the first, you left out Qirat in the first rakat and the second rakat. Or you left out in the first one and not the second one. Or you left out in the second one and not the first one. Right? So here, Imam Muhammad says, Yujibu butlan tahrima. Your tahrima in the beginning becomes batil. Right, so if your tahrima becomes batil, even if you read the last 2 rakats correctly, still it will not be valid because your tahrima was batil. So that means your second 2 rakats, which is your 3rd rakat and your 4th rakat, you read it properly, surah, and you read Surah Fatiha, still it will be batil because it is 2 rakats without a tahrima, because the tahrima became batil. Why the tahrima became batil? He says, this is the reason. He says, look here, what is the purpose of takbir tahrima? The purpose of takbir tahrima is to do the af'al of salah. What is it? And in your first rakat and second rakat, or first and second, or only first or second, you never do the af'al of salah. Qiraat is the af'al of salah. And you never do the af'al of salah. You never do the qiraat. So that means you made takbir tahrima, and then you made a deficient salah, which was devoid of af'al of salah. So that salat is void. So if that salat is void, the tahrima also becomes void. So that means the 2 rakats that come subsequent to that, it doesn't have a tahrima. Is that clear? You sure you got it? I'll do it again. See it. وَالْأَصْلُ فِيهَا. The principle in it, according to Muhammad, is أن إن محمد, according to Imam Muhammad, ترك القراءة في الأوليين, leaving out the qiraat in the first 2 rakats, rakat number 1, rakat number 2, وفي إحداهما, or any one of them two. In other words, either in 1 or in 2, right? What about yujibu butlan tahrimati, because the rakat is not valid. Because you have to make qiraat in it. You never make qiraat. It means the rakat is not valid. And even 1 rakat is not valid, it means both rakats are not valid, because you can't have 1 rakat valid. So since both rakats are not valid, you got the tahrima, you just got no rakats in it. It's like making tahrima and sitting quiet and daydreaming, and then you read the two rakats. The tahrima it has to be succeeded by a valid salah. The takrima must be succeeded by a valid salah. So you say, yeah, that's a nice way. You can say, according to Muhammad, the takbir tahrima must be succeeded by a valid salah for it to be valid. So, yujibu budlan tahrima, it makes wajib the budlan means the budlan, you can say the negation or the corruption of the dhima. لأنها تؤقد الأفعال. Think what's the reason? Because look here, takbir tahrima is there so you can pray, you can read salah. And here you make takbir tahrima and you're not making salah because that's not a complete salah. So the takbir tahrima also becomes void. So that was Imam Muhammad's opinion, right? Now, see now the same scenario. We got the same scenario. Remember, you never make kirat in the first two rakats, or you never make in one of the first two rakats. وعند أبي يوسف ترك القراءة في الشهر الأول لا يوجب بطلان التحريمة. According to Imam Yusuf, whether you leave out takbir tahrima in the first rakat, or whether you read only the second rakat, or whether you read both rakats, it will not negate, it will not result in the fasad of your takbir tahrima. So even if you read nothing in both rakats, even if you read in one rakat, still it will not affect your takbir tahrima is intact. So if your third and fourth rakat is correct, it's got its kirat, it can depend, or it can, or rather that takbir tahrima which was succeeded by invalid salat, it is good enough for the third and fourth rakat. That's what he's saying. Are you with me? See there. وإن أبي يوسف تركوا القراءة, leaving out the قراءة في الشف الأول, in the first shafa. I told you whether it's one rakat or both rakats, لا يجب بطلان التحريمة. It does not make necessary the corruption of the tahrima. وإنما يجب فساد الأداء. He's saying, look here. Yes, you never make kirat in the salah. You never make kirat in the first rakat. You never make kirat in the second rakat. Or you never make, yes, we agree that rakats are not valid. That rakats are not valid. It is not salah. But the corruption in the rakats, it does not extend to the tahrima. The corruption is restricted to the rakats. The corruption was in the rakats. It was not in the takrima. Why are you extending the corruption of the rakats to the tahrima? The rakat is batil, not the tahrima. That's what he's saying. See them. وإنما, so not the rakat not being valid due to not having kirat. وإنما يجب فساد الأداء. It makes necessary the corruption of the discharging of it. لأن القراءة ركن زائد, because kirat is a rukn of the rakat. It's a rukn. It's extra right. And they say, look here, you can't say, even though kirat is a rukn of the salah, its absence does not contaminate the, what you call it, its absence cannot contaminate the takbir tahrima. We will show you there are instances where the salah is done, the takbir is not batil or void, even though there was no kirat. Here's a proof. ألا ترى, don't you see, أن للصلاة وجودا بدونها. Don't you see sometimes salat is valid without kirat? Sometimes salat is valid without kirat. Right? ألا ترى أن للصلاة وجودا, there is for salah existence بدون, without it, غير أنه لا صحة للأداء. Yes, salat can exist without the takbir tahrima. Yes, it does غير أنها, but it doesn't لا صحة للأداء. There is no correctness for its validity, that the salat will exist despite it's not being valid. للأداء إلا بها. And they see here, they give in the Shara, they say, like, for example, if you look at a dumb person, he can't read. Isn't this salah is valid? So, see, when a dumb person doesn't make the kirat, is it takbir tahrima void? No. It's still there. You understood? That was Imam Yusuf's reasoning. You understood that? Just checking here 1 second. So like he says, look here, A dumb person's salah is still valid without reciting. That shows you the absence of qiraat doesn't necessarily make butlan. You understood that, right? So yes, we agree also that the salah will not be done, but its corruption does not extend. If its corruption, the absence of qiraat would corrupt the takbir tahrima, then a dumb person's takbir tahrima is also supposed to be. And I'll give another reason to show you as another. See, he's saying, look here, this is another reason he's saying why the fasad does not extend towards the takbir tahrima. If you leave the namaz, for example, say simple example, you are reading namaz, right? And your wudu broke, and you went to go make wudu, right? Does the takbir tahrima become batil? Doesn't become batil. You leaving namaz on your own. So by leaving kirat, how can it make it batil? Understood? So when you leave the actual namaz because your wudu broke to make wudu and come back, it does not affect your takbir tahrima. How can leaving the karat also just leaving the kirat affects you? Understood it? So so now what he's saying is that yes, the rakat is not valid. So even if you left in both rakats, even if in both rakats you leave out the kirat, still the third and the fourth rakat will be valid. Are you with me? So yeah, let's see. Yeah, I tell you, وإن أبي يوسف ترك القراءة في الصف الأول لا يجيب بدار تحريمته. According to Imam Yusuf, leaving out qiraat in the first shafa, it will not result in the negation or the corruption of the tahrima. وإنما يجيب فساد الأداء. Yes, it will result in the corruption of that rakat you are doing. لأن القراءة ركن زائد, because qiraat is a rukn زائد, is extra rukn, is necessary, right? It's an extra rukn necessary. It doesn't mean that the tahrima depends upon it. And here I will show you where the takbir tahrima can exist without the kirat. ألا ترى أن للصلاة وجودا بدونها. Don't you see that the takbir tahrima can exist without that? Like I told you, like a dumb person, right? غير أن لا صحة للأداء إلا بها. Yes, we agree that the namaz will not be done if you don't have an excuse for not to make kirat, but it will not extend to that, right? والفساد الأداء لا يزيد على تركه. So the fasad of ada, so Imam Yusuf is saying, when the ada is fasid, that means the rikat is not done, that لا يزيد على تركه, right? وفساد الأداء لا يزيد على تركه. It won't go beyond that and affect the tahrima also. فلا يبطل التحريمة, so the tahrima will not become batil. Now, remember to Imam Hanifa, even if you make kirat in one rakat is good enough, because some ulama say that kirat in one rakat is good enough. So if some ulama say that kirat in one rakat is good enough, although we don't agree with that, we say you get to make only kirat one rakat, but we say the fact that they said there's ikhtilaf in the masala, it decreases the severity of it. So it decreases. So some salah that ulama say is permissible. How can we go to the extreme and say even that the tahrima is batil? You understand what I'm saying? Is it? وإن أبي حنيفة أقول حنيفة ترك القراءة في الأوليين, leaving out the qiraat in both of the two rakats, يوجب بطلان التحريمة. Yes, that will say that the tahrima is batil, because according to nobody the rakats are valid. And if according to nobody's rakats are valid, it's like just going up and down in the ground. So like you made takbir tahrima, then you stood it nothing, you looked around, and then you started. So that means you separated between your second shufa and your takbir tahrima. You understood? يجب بطلان التحريمة وفي إحداهما. But yes, if you make kirat in the first rakat or the second rakat, then according to Aimma, the salat is valid. So when you got a salat which is valid according to Aimma, how can you say that the tahrima is batil? You understood? وفي إحداهما لا يجب. It will not make واجب the بطلان التحريمة. ولأن كل شفعة من التطوير صلاة على حدة, because every shufa is a separate namaz. So even though the first one, the rakat is not valid because you only had kirat in one, but the tahrima is valid. and you got the third and fourth rakat is valid, it's the sihat, the correctness of the third and fourth rakat is not premise, it's not premise on the first and second rakat. Understood? So they say لأن كل شخص من التطوع صلاة على حدة وفسادها بترك الكاتب في رقم واحد مجتهد فيه. The corruption of leaving the kirat in one rakat, right? Sorry, the corruption of leaving kirat in one rakat, it's mujtahid fi. I explained to some ulama is the namaz is still valid. So we can't make the decision to say now that the tahrima is also batil because it's a mukhtalaf thing. فقضينا بالفساد بحق وجوب القضاء. So yes, we've made a decision with the corruption with regards to the compulsion of rereading the two rakats, right? But not that the tahrima became batil, right? وحكمنا ببقاء التحريمة, but we also decided, we made a decision ببقاء التحريمة was the remaining or the validity of the tahrima في حق لزوم الشفع الثاني with regards to the valid for the second shafa احتياطا out of caution because of the ikhtilaf of the ulama between that. So if you understood today's lesson, inshallah, the forthcoming lesson is very easy. It's just building on, it's looking at different scenarios and applying the usul of the different aima. So if you understood these usul properly, the other 7 scenarios that will come, we're just going to apply the same scenario, we'll go through it easily, inshallah. I hope that makes it clear, inshallah. Is it quite clear to you? We must stop there. But subhanallah.